Hi, I'm Jack, and welcome to States Unlocked, the place to learn about social psychology, human behavior, and learn practical tips on how you can improve your life. Today is a very special video because I'm with my dear friend Emerald. We're doing a collaboration, and I hope you enjoy it. The less dense your shadow is and the more integrated you are as a person, the higher capacity you have for empathy, and it potentially ends people who have a denser shadow often, I think, probably gaslight a lot more, and they may not even be, and it's not to kind of take away from the fact that that is not a good thing to do and can be very
Mhm.
abusive, but they may not even be aware that they're doing it because they're running away from so much stuff in themselves. Because in order to actually be honest about things, it would mean having to get that stuff out of the shadow, which they just aren't capable of doing or at that moment aren't willing to do because they haven't yet integrated that stuff. So potentially the denser the shadow, the more abusive behaviors can come to the forefront. What do you
Oh,
think?
absolutely. And so basically, like, if you think about what's going on with the creation of the shadow, there has to be like a maintenance to that. So, like, the shadow isn't just repressed once and then it just goes away. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
person has to consistently be orienting to those aspects of themselves that way. Otherwise, they would just come back to the surface. So, there has to be some kind of process that a person is engaging in, usually unconsciously. And so, that internal, like, subtle thing that they may not even pick up on that invalidates that aspect of themselves, they're going to notice that tendency in other people, or they're going to orient to them the very same way. So let's say that a person, represses their emotions, and bullies themselves into not feeling their own emotions. They're more likely to orient to other people that same way and invalidate
Yeah,
others'
definitely.
emotions. And that's when you get this kind of snowball effect. Like, so for example, like when I had mentioned that when I was little, like I was very like, oh, I don't feel emotions, blah, 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 and just like trying to put on this kind of front. I really shamed other people who showed their emotions. Like I remember me and this like kid who was like my age, who's a boy, like we had ended up falling and like skidding really hard across the tile floor and it really hurt. But I made sure I popped back up, and then he was on the floor crying and I was like, oh, you're such a wimp, like blah blah blah, so I was like, basically I was treating him externally the same way that I was treating myself internally,
Yeah.
and it's just being able to like notice that in retrospect, looking back. Because at the time I was like 9, 10 years old, and I just thought that, oh, this is just the way that you handle the emotions. And then like it's always this game to see who can be like the least emotional. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing. People often end up like orienting to aspects of themselves a certain way, and then all of that dynamic gets projected onto people that happen to hold those same traits. And this is why, like, like looking at the judgments, looking at like when people just kind of ruffle our feathers, we're not sure why. This can often show when there's like some shadow, some kind of shadow that's being maintained, pushed away.
Well, what you just said, I mean, it makes total sense why oftentimes in like unhealthy family dynamics, like someone that's made the scapegoat is often the most sensitive person because, they're really like bringing up a lot of stuff in the other people because of their own shadows, and they're basically actively pushing against it because the scapegoat is reminding the people of not the people, but the family members that, or like whatever group of people it is, that the part of themselves that they're really trying to run away from. And I think like that's the thing, that it's like whatever you identify with, you gravitate towards, don't you? And then what you don't identify with, you really push away, and because of your associations about what that thing means. So if you're someone that is perceiving someone that's emotional as weak, out of control, like not composed, then that's going to be really repellent to you. If you see it, you're really going to feel like, oh, that's horrible. And but if you don't perceive it that way, it's obviously a lot more likely to make its way into your experience, and you know like attracts
Absolutely.
like.
Yeah, and what's interesting is there's always a push-pull, like when it comes to these situations. Like, so let's take, for example, let's take it out of the family example and let's take it into like the romance and dating kind of spectrum. So let's say that the person who was made the scapegoat because they were emotional, and the family members have repressed away their emotions. And so it brings up like that tendency in the other people to like, almost like to make them the scapegoat, the whipping boy, for their own, to basically to be oriented to in the same way that they would orient to their own repressed emotions. And so
Hmm.
this is going to create certain wounds in the person who has the tendency to like be scapegoated. And so there'll be this other part of them that pushes away from that. And so what ends up happening is that that person ends up going through life, the person who is scapegoated, and they'll tend to attract other people and be attracted to other people who mirrored those same family dynamics. They'll tend to be maybe attracted to people who are more stoic, and more invalidating of the emotions. And what happens for the person who seeks out the person who becomes a scapegoat is they're going to have this kind of internal orientation as well, like, oh, emotions are invalid, let's push those away. And oh, look, there's this person who shows their emotions and who's really vulnerable, and it'll create this sense of extreme attraction for that person because it's like it matches what's going on in that person's shadow, and they'll go like, oh my god, this is the person that I need to be with. I need to
Hmm.
have some kind of communion with this person because there's this desire to integrate. But once the relationship gets going, that internal dynamic of pushing constantly
Yeah,
away at the
push.
shadow is going to come into the dynamic as well. And that's why there tends to be this element of attraction, repulsion in these unhealthy dynamics, is because the people are usually playing out their internal trauma, they're playing out their internal split, and especially when it comes to the repression of the emotions and repression of anger and all this, there's a real tendency to be attracted to the person who is the mirror opposite, and like it's just this clashing constantly, but this intense magnetic attraction as well.
Hmm. And so, what would you say to like anyone watching this who would ask the question, what's a practical way to integrate that stuff? So, let's say the dynamic you're describing, because I'm sure lots of people watching it will be like, this is my life.
Mhm.
Like, so what would you say in order to actually change that pattern to actually, like I said, become more conscious of it and to consciously integrate that?
So taking it like from the perspective of the people who are pushing away their emotions, I think one of the main things is looking into the reason why they're pushing away their emotions in the first place, because usually it's a desire to hide some kind of vulnerability. There was probably some kind of trauma where their emotions were invalidated, and maybe even someone who is going to come in and like, almost poke a stick in what's sensitive and vulnerable. And so really being able to face with that trauma, face with that emotion, and to process through it will help the person get to the point where they can open back up and also drop the more intellectual coping mechanisms that say, oh, you can never trust anyone, or oh, you can't do this, or like everybody's always going to try to mess you over. So it's a mix of being able to process through emotions on the level of the body, and then also to let go of certain mindsets that keep that vulnerability from happening, which again will be, it's a bit difficult to deal with those emotions because there's a lot of vulnerability there that hides. Now,
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. It really helps me out. And be sure to check out my friend's channel, Emerald. She is the Diamond Net on YouTube. The videos are fantastic, so I definitely recommend checking her out. And thanks so much for watching.